This is for Algebra 2. This is the review over quadratic formula, completing the square, and quadratic inequalities. The first few problems on here are not actually on your review. They're just going over things you need to be aware of and remember how to deal with. If you have the square root of negative 32, first of all, this is an even number, so we've got to see what all we can pull out. 32 divided by 2 is 16, divided by 2 is 8, divided by 2 is 4, divided by 2 is 2. At this point, we want to pair them up so that we can pull them out. We've got two 2's and we've got two more 2's. Each time you pull it out, if there's more than one thing, you're going to multiply. So 2 times 2 is 4. We have the lonesome 2 here that stays under the square root. And because it was a negative, we pull an I out. Remember that square roots are always plus or minus. So your answer is plus or minus 4i square root of 2. When you have i's in your problem, you're just looking at combining like terms. You don't make any changes. 3 minus 7 is negative 4. 5i plus 8i is plus 13i. When you have conjugates, which means you have the same stuff but with different signs, all you actually have to do is first minus last. So 6 times 6 is 36 minus 2i times 2i is 4i squared. Remember that anytime you see an I squared, you're actually going to drop the I squared but change the sign. So this becomes plus 4. 36 plus 4 is 40. You want to look anytime you have a radical and see if you can break it down. This becomes 9 plus, and instead of square root of 144, we know that that is 12. We're going to do an I because of the negative over 6. Make sure and always check to see if you can reduce. All three of these will divide by 3. So it's actually 3 plus 4i over 2. You cannot have an I in the bottom of the fraction. So the way you get rid of that is you multiply the top and bottom by the conjugate of the bottom. So 1 plus 5i is what we're going to multiply the top and the bottom by. Distribute on the top and 3i plus 15i squared, but we know that plus 15i squared is actually going to become minus 15. So 3i minus 15 on top. On the bottom, you're going to do first minus last. So 1 times 1 is 1, minus 5i times 5i is 25i squared. Don't forget that when you have I squared, you're going to drop the I squared and change the sign. So this is really plus 25. 25 plus 1 is 26. Check to see if they will reduce. They won't. So this is your answer. Once again, you cannot have an I in the bottom, so we're going to multiply the top and the bottom by the conjugate of the bottom, which is 4 plus 3i. You're going to have to distribute on the top. 1 times 4 is 4, plus 1 times 3i is 3i, plus 2i times 4 is 8i, plus 2i times 3i is 6i squared. The I squared changes this to a minus 6. Combine your like terms. 4 minus 6 is negative 2. 3i plus 8i is plus 11i. That's your top. On the bottom, it's just first minus last. So 4 times 4 is 16, minus 3i times 3i is 9i squared, which becomes plus 9. 16 plus 9 is 25, and you would check to see if you could reduce, and you can't. So now it takes us to the actual review sheet that you just did. Let's go over it and see if you got it correct. Solve by completing the square. Remember, the first thing you have to do is get the constant over on the right. So this 9 has to move, and it becomes x squared plus 6x equals 1 minus 9 is negative 8. You take the number in front of x, you divide it by 2 always, you get 3. You take this number, you square it, and you get 9. This number is going to get added to both sides. So it becomes x squared plus 6x plus 9 is equal to negative 8 plus 9. You're going to rewrite the left. X, you use whatever symbol you had in the original problem. So plus whatever number you squared, so 3. X plus 3 quantity squared is equal to negative 8 plus 9, which is 1. You got to get rid of your square root, or your squared, so we're going to square root both sides. The square root and the squared cancel each other out and leave you with just x plus 3 equals the square root of 1 is plus or minus 1. Last step is to come over here and bring this 3 to the other side. Remember to do the opposite. If it was a positive 3, x is now is equal to plus or minus 1 minus 3. You have to do the opposite. I was catching people not doing that on their homework. So then x is equal to 1 minus 3, which is negative 2, and x is equal to negative 1 minus 3, which is negative 4. So looking at number 2, it's already got the constant on the right, so we're good to go. 3 divided by 2 is equal to 1.5. Square that and you get 2.25. That is going to get added to both sides, so it becomes x squared minus 3x plus 2.25 equals 40 plus 2.25. Rewrite the left. This one is x minus because of the minus in the original problem. 1.5 because that's what we squared, and then put a squared on the outside. Equals 42.25. So now we're going to square root both sides. It cancels with the squared and leaves me x minus 1.5 on the left. And then plus or minus the square root of 42.25 is 6.5. So we're going to move our 1.5 to the other side. We're going to add it because it was a minus. And so x is equal to plus or minus 6.5 plus 1.5. So x is equal to 6.5 plus 1.5, which is 8. And x is equal to negative 6.5 plus 1.5, which is negative 5. That's completing the square. Now we're going to solve using the quadratic formula. This time everything has to be on the same side. Figure out what your a, your b, and your c are. A is 3, b is negative 13, c is 4. Your formula is negative b, so instead of a negative 13, I've got to use the opposite sign, 13. Plus or minus the square root of b squared, so negative 13 squared, minus 4 times a is 3 times c is 4. All over 2 times a, which is 3. Take what's under the square root and do that first. It becomes 13 plus or minus the square root of 121 all over 2 times 3, which is 6. The square root of 121 is 11, so it becomes 13 plus or minus 11 all over 6. 13 plus 11 is 24 divided by 6 is 4, so there's one answer. 13 minus 11 is 2 divided by 6 is 1/3 or 0.333. Moving to number 4, you're going to have to distribute the 2 first. So when you distribute the 2, you have 10x squared is equal to negative 24x minus 4. You need everything on the same side, so bring everything over to the left and it becomes 10x squared plus 24x plus 4 equals 0. So a is 10, b is 24, and c is 4. Putting it into your formula, negative 24 plus or minus the square root of 24 squared minus 4 times 10 times 4 all over 2 times 10. Just using this formula right here, you will have the formula provided on the exam. Do what's under the square root, and so it becomes negative 24 plus or minus the square root of 416. All over 2 times 10 is 20. Take your 416 somewhere and see what you can divide it by. It's even, so divided by 2 gives me 208. Divided by 2 gives me 104. Divided by 2 gives me 52. Divided by 2 gives me 26. Divided by 2 gives me 13. Pair them up and pull them out. 2 times 2 is 4. This is actually going to reduce to negative 24 plus or minus. Here's my 2 times 2 is 4. Square root of 2 and 13 are left. Multiply those and it gives you 26 all over 20. All of these will divide by 4. So negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 26 all over 5 is your final answer. Moving to the next page, we're going to be looking at quadratic inequalities. You are going to want to put this in y equal. You're going to want to look at your table and get some points. No specific points, just anything. So I went to y equal and I put it in just like it looks. I didn't worry about distributing or anything. And 2, 3 was a good point. So over 2, up 3. Negative 1, 6 was a good point. So left 1 and up 6. And then 5, 6 was a good point. So I used the points from my table. I looked at this and I saw that it was going to be a dashed line. It's dashed because it's not equal to. So draw your dashed line or curve, parabola, whatever you want to say. And then you're going to shade. And our shading rule says that since it is pointing to the y, you're going to shade below. So that means it's down here. It's below your parabola. And then the last one, we're actually going to make a change. It should have already been made on your paper. Instead of a 1 right here, this should be a negative 10. The first thing that you have to do is get everything on the same side. And you want your x squared to be positive. So I'm going to move my negative 4x squared. I'm also going to get it in order, x squared x, and then my constant. So 0 is less than 4x squared plus 4x minus 10. This is what you're going to either use quadratic formula, put it in y equal. It's not going to show up in your table. You're going to have to go second calc number 2 for 0. Something to figure out your solutions. And when I did this, I went second calc number 2 for 0, and I got negative 2.16, and I got 1.5. So come to your number line, and the negative one, or the smaller one, has to go on the left. So negative 2.16, and the big one has to go on the right, 1.5. So then you go to your table and you pick a point smaller than negative 2.16. So like use negative 3. Okay, look at negative 3 on your table and see what you get for your answer. On my table, when x is negative 3, y is 14. So go back up here and say, is 0 less than 14? Yes, it is, so I'm going to shade this part. Pick a number between negative 2 and 1.5, and so I went with 0. If x is 0, y is negative 10. Is 0 less than negative 10? No, it's not, so you don't shade the middle part. And then pick a number larger than 1.5. If I go with 3, I get 38. Is 0 less than 38? Yes, it is, so that's the part that I shade. I'm replacing this whole side right here with whatever my y value was, and then comparing that to the 0. So now that I know, by the way, this should be open circles because there is no line under it, and I'm going to describe it. X is less than negative 2.16, or x is greater than 1.5. One thing you need to realize, I'm just going to kind of scroll down a little bit. If you happen to end up with a graph like this, let's just pretend that it's closed with 3 and closed with 6, and it's shaded in the middle. Instead of something like this, you're going to have one inequality, and it's going to be 3 is less than or equal to x is less than or equal to 6. Your numbers are your boundaries. X is the middle. If it is a closed circle, it needs a line under it. Okay, and your arrows always point left, always. Okay, that's all for the review. Your exam is tomorrow. If you have any questions, you need to call me over and have me go over it with you.